this slide we're going to skip over very quickly because it's kind of a post-mortem. This document is kind of dead, I'm sorry to say.
It's gone.
It's gone. But the reason I think it bears sort of mentioning is that, you know, some very brilliant people worked on this thing in the last administration, at least Alondra Nelson, your colleague at Princeton, Ruha. And she, of course, talks about the ways in which all these things that we need to think about in terms of transparency, in terms of discrimination, in terms of how we can engage and think about AIs that could be emancipatory or could be tools for good or for equity. But she also said something I think seems so important, which is that so much of AI policy is sort of focused on bad actors and, oh, what if the Chinese get these chips, or what if the AI itself becomes a bad actor? Without focusing on what you've focused on so much in your work, both of you, the ways in which extant sort of systems or AIs that are doing what they're supposed to do reinforce extant systems, the world as it is, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and one of the, sort of takeaways thinking about this AI Bill of Rights is how hard it is to create something and how easy it is to destroy something, like in terms of just time scale, energy, investment. And so, we think about, I've written about sort of abolition as it relates to technology, and that word often evokes the destroying part. But really, that abulere, the growing, what do we want to foster and cultivate? It takes so much more work and wisdom to be able to create something as my colleagues did, and in a stroke of a pen, destroy. And so that's partly an invitation for us to think about how we place our limited energies, our little lifetimes that we have here. How do we want to spend it? What do we want to invest it in terms of those twin processes?
And we've arrived at imagination.
Yeah.
Right on cue.
Yes.
And these words from another mighty writer, Toni Morrison: as you enter positions of trust and power, dream a little before you think.
Yeah.
Those words are important to you. Tell us why.
Yeah, train as a scholar, research, this enlightenment model of what we need. And, I started coming to the conclusion many years ago that the facts alone aren't going to save us. Creating more and more data about things that we know a lot about already, And so in some ways, constantly seeking data for things and to prove this or that, it becomes in some ways a placeholder for acting on what we already know, right? So the critique, a mass of data, but thinking about how to actually infuse that in our actions, in our work, in our world building. And this sort of invitation is really important for me as an educator as I think about how to scaffold knowledge production, where to place our energies, as I was mentioning before, and really taking imagination seriously. Not as flights of fancy, not as something only for self-proclaimed artists, not as something that necessarily can fit in the context of an exhibit, but all of the forms of imagination that happen even in the mundane things, like in a spreadsheet, right? In a budget. Organizers often call, budgets moral documents because they tell us who and what we value. So looking for imagination in unexpected places, but also inviting ourselves to exercise imagination, even if we don't think of ourselves as a creative or as an artist. Because in my view, that's part of the world building that Butler did. When you go to the Huntington and you see, her papers, she was studying newspapers, she was studying medical anthropology, she was doing so much research and then deciding to present it in the form of narrative and fiction, on the one hand. But she was also doing a lot in the margins in terms of dreaming before we think, in that, she was fashioning and creating her own life. There's so many aspects of the exhibit here that just remind me, the fact that she has this phrase that she would write her marginalia, note to herself. So be it, see to it. A mantra that's almost willing into being what she wanted to manifest in the world. She was writing herself into existence. She was saying well before anyone acknowledged her brilliance, I'm going to be a New York Times bestseller. Boom, boom, boom. So be it, see to it. I'm going to be able to buy my dream house. So be it, see to it. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And it's that kind of conjuring and imagination and creativity that happens, yes, on the individual level, as she did, but I think we have to also channel that sort of willingness in our collective work, in our world building, in our organizing, in our movement efforts, to really step back sometimes and think beyond the strategies that we need to get those short-term goals, which are important, but really to center vision, that bigger vision that we're trying to conjure and manifest in terms of our shared futures.